For USCFootball.com, I'm Jack Smith, alongside Connor Morrissette for Instant Analysis from USC's Wednesday evening practice of Utah Week. Connor, it was another short practice. Did you have any observations from the shorter media period that we had early?
Unfortunately, no. They cut the viewing period short this week, as I think you talked about yesterday, so we only saw stretching, and the guys look good stretching. That's all I got.
Yeah, you would say lunges and everything like that, but we mentioned it yesterday on the show that the media period was cut drastically yesterday, and Chris and I had talked about, we're not sure whether this is going to be an every-time thing, maybe it was just a one-time thing. Both practices this week, we only got to see that stretching portion instead of stretching in scout team yesterday and stretching in drills today, so we'll see if that continues on for the rest of the season. It definitely would hurt instant analysis if we don't get to talk about anything we see in the drills or anything like that, especially with scout team not being able to be reported on, so we'll see if that continues going forward, but you'll have to wait until next Tuesday, and we kind of have to wait until next Tuesday to hear the news on that. But one of the big kind of positives of the day is normally we talk to Dennis Simmons this week, and we were going to get Josh Henson last week, but this week we actually did get to talk to Josh Henson because of a scheduling thing with Dennis Simmons, so we got to talk to the USC offensive line coach after what is definitely USC's worst offensive line performance of the season. Henson was critical of the unit, just as most fans have been, and just as we were on the podcast after the game, but what were some of your biggest takeaways from what Henson had to say?
My biggest thing, he said Jonah Monheim has been good. Everyone else, every other position is up for grabs, and I thought that was interesting. So he mentioned Mason Murphy, how he played well again, taking over for Michael Tarquin at right tackle in the first half of the Notre Dame game. The guards weren't particularly good, and it sounds like Henson's really going to look at how can they get better play overall. I think a lot of it is just going to come down to technique and them continuing to work on what they've been working on. I don't expect a lot of changes in terms of what they're doing in practice, but Coach Henson talked about how Killian O'Connor, the walk-on center, who is now the backup center because Gino Quinones is out for the year with an injury, he's been practicing really well. I wouldn't be totally shocked if Justin Diedich plays a little guard and Killian O'Connor, maybe not this week, but at some point down the line, if things keep going this way, is at center. We'll see what happens there. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, Lincoln Riley teased potential personnel changes they were looking into, and Henson was asked about it specifically. He said they look into stuff like that every week, and that basically for this entire season, every spot has been up for grabs. He said the one area that they have gotten really consistent play, consistently good play, has been at left tackle with Monheim. But yeah, he did say all four of those other spots, they're up in the air. He was asked specifically about, which guys 6 through 10 on the 2 deep have been practicing particularly well. He said obviously Mason Murphy, who we have seen in games. Killian O'Connor, he said, was that next name of guys who have been practicing well. That's a guy that we have seen for, I believe, one play on the entire season in non-garbage time, non-switching guys out time. And then he also mentioned Alani Noah, who he said Alani Noah is going through some personal stuff so far this year, but he said that, down the line, he's been practicing really well. But it seems like, Killian O'Connor, right after Mason Murphy, who we've seen with Michael Tarquin playing poorly at right tackle, Murphy's gotten a chance and might be coming to a time where O'Connor gets a chance if he is that next name up.
And then potentially does that move Tarquin to some other spot? So they do have some options, even though the depth is really limited. And that's what happens when you use the transfer portal to beef up an offensive line that wasn't very good because they were going to be hit with graduation off of last year. So the staff has been getting a lot of grief for the offensive line, but I think these issues, I thought they'd be better, but I don't think they deserve to get hammered for it. 1 or 2 misses in the portal, it's not the end of the world. It's just a tough break. So Henson also talked about, I asked him, what was the most glaring issue that he saw in the film? And he said the run defense was awful. Guys were trying to block people, and then if a running back made a cut, it was too easy. The defensive players had it too easy of a time shedding the block. He also talked about communication, and then he listed a few other things and just said overall it wasn't good enough. And then when he left the scrum, he critiqued us, and he said, for 6.5 sacks that we let up, I thought those are some easy questions. He joked something like that, so I thought that was fun. He knows the pressure's on. He knows the heat's on. I think he's a really good coach. It seems like they're just going to keep doing what they're doing in practice with technique and just keep grinding, and I think if you're a USC fan, you just have to hope that it works a little bit better. I don't really know what they can do outside of a few tweaks personnel-wise here or there. They kind of have what they have.
Yeah, I asked him specifically, did he feel like it's a technique issue, a fundamental issue, or is it a cohesion issue, a chemistry issue? And he said it's both. He said there were times during the Notre Dame game where they just straight up could not block one-on-one. They just missed blocks. They had poor technique, poor fundamentals, stuff they do in practice all the time that they just could not execute. And then he also said there were times where they just weren't communicating very well. And obviously, when you get in a rivalry atmosphere, it's hard to do that. But the offensive line has struggled with that over the last couple weeks. And so he said it's an issue in both regards. He was also asked an interesting question about they're 7 weeks into the season so far. They're on this stretch of 9 straight games against Power 5 opponents. What is his confidence level? What has he seen through his career about turning things around? He's like, well, I've coached in college football for 23 years. There have been times where I'm like, okay, we're going to turn this around, and then they don't turn it around. And then he's like, well, there's also times where I think, oh, there's no way this group turns it around, and then they do. So I guess, you trust his experience, 23 years of coaching. He clearly knows they're not playing well, and I think you have to put your trust in him a little bit to get this group going with the talent they do have. But at the same time, the way that the line has looked and their chemistry specifically over the last couple weeks, it is definitely the biggest concern on the USC offense.
This is me reading too much into those comments, but everyone knows they should be better based on every guy's skill level individually. So him saying that leads me to believe that he thinks they can turn it around, and then he said sometimes when he thinks they can, they can't. A little nervous, but like I said, you got to give this guy the benefit of the doubt. He's done a really nice job in the past. He coached Mitchell Schwartz, who's on the Chiefs at Missouri. Those Missouri lines were always pretty good. So if you're a USC fan, I think just hope for the best. And there is talent there. Haven't seen it. Keep praying, I guess.
He was very, complimentary of the Utah defensive line.
Quit.
So they never quit. The pass rushers are going to give you their entire, motor through the entire rep, so you really can't slack off. This is a very important week for the USC offensive line because they struggled so heavily in Vegas last year in the Pac-12 championship game against a similar unit that we were told they run the same schemes on offense and defense. So it looks like USC is going to be seeing a similar team, even if Cam Rising isn't the quarterback. Different things have changed around with Utah, but especially for that offensive line, they're going to have their, a task put out for them by this Utah defensive line, yes. And then Jonah Monheim, I was asking him, how he thought the team practiced last week. If they were so dissatisfied with the way the game went, were they dissatisfied with the way practice went? And he said no, they thought they had a really, really good week in practice last week. They unfortunately couldn't carry it over to the game, and he said that kind of resets their standard because if they thought they had a good week of practice and it led to that performance in the game, they have to rethink what a good week in practice is, and they're attacking this week much more heavily than they did last week just because you can't be good if good isn't good enough during the game.
Definite warning sign there, him saying the practice was good and then they didn't come out and play well. He really took responsibility, which is something that I like to see, a guy take accountability, take responsibility for the issues, and he just said, we can talk about it so much, but we just got to go out there and do it. It was kind of like what Alex Grinch said after the Colorado game. We can talk about the struggle so much, but we just got to go out and execute. I guess if you want to look for a positive, after that Colorado game, the Arizona game defensively was a little shaky for USC, but they played better against Notre Dame. The defense has gotten better. Like Grinch said, we got to do it. Now Monheim is saying we got to go out there and do it. Maybe we'll see a similar turnaround from the O-line.
Yeah, Monheim is very talented. Of course, you've got Justin Dedich, who was so good on the line last year. And it might be just a chemistry thing with transfer portal guys, as we've heard different players talk about over time. But Monheim said chemistry is a thing built over time. The problem is USC doesn't really have that right now because they've got to get ready for Utah this weekend. We got to talk to Caleb Williams as well, as we do on most Wednesdays, coming off of his worst game that he said basically his only bad game as a college quarterback. He was asked, as an emotional competitor, how do you bounce back? What did you take away from his answer?
He said, I've had only one bad game in college, and it was last week, and I don't want to be in this position of having to use that bad game and last week's loss to motivate me, but that's where we are. And we're going to use last week, the team as motivation, me as motivation. Sounds like the word is motivated. The word of the day is motivated. He's really excited to get back and get the record straight after a really disappointing performance for his high standards last week. Not really much else. Like he was asked that a bunch of times, and he just kind of kept going back to, I'm motivated by last week. I'm much better than I showed last week. Lincoln Riley said earlier in the week, don't bet on Caleb Williams having two bad performances in a row. Based on all he's talking about right now, Utah, that defense is really good, maybe even better than Notre Dame. Caleb, like we have been talking about with everyone, it's time to go out and show it.
Yeah, it seems like he definitely hasn't lost his confidence. He did say he threw 3 dumb picks, but he's not letting that affect his confidence for this week. And kind of similarly to how Lincoln Riley did in his post-game press conference, banking on his track record and saying he's going to keep being consistent because it's worked for him in the past. And he had one bad game in his college career. Michael Jackson was asked about how Caleb has responded, and I thought it was really interesting. He basically said that Caleb took the team aside at the front end of the week, addressed the entire team, and he really has taken on a more serious leader role. He said he's taken his leadership role very seriously throughout the entire season, but this week there was just an extra emphasis from Caleb after the performance last weekend. Is there any takeaway you have from that?
That's awesome. Your star quarterback, who of course is destined for great things in the NFL. There's been a lot of talk this week about him looking ahead potentially to the NFL. The fact that he's taking his team together and leading them out of this, what more could you want? I mean, that's kind of the baseline for all quarterbacks, but with all the speculation going on this week with USC starting quarterback, that was really encouraging to hear, and I wouldn't expect anything less from him. he's developed into a really good leader, and the fact that he's taking it to another level, that's only good news for USC fans.
Did you have any other takeaways from today's practice, or we're going to wrap this up and then head to tunnel vision tomorrow and the game on Saturday?
My last thing, Caleb was asked about the Notre Dame fan who took the video, selfie, asked him about his nails and kind of made fun of him after the loss, just his reaction to that. And Caleb said it was really calm, cool, collected, and kind of awesome. He was like, people wish they were in my shoes, and that's really all there is to it. So that was a really unfortunate situation. I think the court storming and the field storming is cool if there's an upset. That wasn't an upset by Notre Dame, but that's something that happens, and I don't want to see that taken out of sports, but it's really hard because you got to protect the players, and no one should be able, after a tough loss, go up and take a video selfie and get close and even touch a player after a game. That's not right. So I don't really know how you solve that problem, but it was cool to see Caleb take the high road, and I thought he had a really awesome response because it's true. That guy who took the video, yeah, he got content, but who wouldn't want to be in Caleb's shoes? Everyone in the world would rather be in Caleb Williams' shoes than that fan, and I thought him providing that perspective was awesome to see.
Yeah, we'll see if he can turn this team around, win the game against Utah this weekend. We'll have our preview show on Tunnel Vision here on YouTube on Inside Troy tomorrow night. It'll be Connor and I and RJ Abadia in the studio doing the show. We're also going to have an interview with Kalen Bullock tomorrow through House of Victory. So if you have any questions, you can leave those in the YouTube comments here, or if you're a member of the site, go on the Peristyle and leave us some questions for USC's All-American Free Safety. There's more interviews up here on YouTube. Austin Jones, Michael Jackson, of course, Henson and Williams, as we talked about, and a bunch from yesterday, including Lincoln Riley and Alex Grinch. If you guys have not tuned in, we had instant analysis with Chris and I yesterday. There's a ton of USC content ahead of what is probably so far the most important game of the year, and I feel like we're going to say that every week going on because USC's backs are kind of against the wall when it comes to the college football playoff. If they lose in the Pac-12, their backs are really against the wall when it comes to making the Pac-12 championship game. So you're going to want to stay tuned in here on Inside Troy, USCfootball.com for the rest of the season. But anyways, that's all we've got for you guys today. For Connor Morrissette, I'm Jack Smith. Check out USCfootball.com for more.